In the heart of California, a prison once meant to rehabilitate inmates eventually turned into a den of violence and brutality. It became known for its unchecked power dynamics, where a select few could rule with an iron fist. Its story is one of corruption, violence, and a chilling transformation into a place even more dangerous than the world outside. This is the tale of Pelican Bay State Prison. Established in 1989, Pelican Bay was built to house the most dangerous criminals in California. Its solitary confinement unit, the Security Housing Unit, SHU, was designed to isolate violent offenders from the rest of the prison population. Little did anyone know, it would become a hotbed for even more violence and manipulation. The SHU was built to prevent gang activity, but over time, it became a breeding ground for some of the most notorious criminal organizations in the United States. This isolation, instead of reforming inmates, turned them into more hardened criminals, with their psychological well-being deteriorating under harsh conditions. The prison quickly gained a reputation for its inhumane conditions. Prisoners were confined to their cells for 23 hours a day, often with little human contact. They were subjected to sensory deprivation, with minimal access to sunlight or fresh air. It didn't take long for inmates to crack under the pressure, and violence soon became the prison's currency. By the mid-1990s, Pelican Bay became a hotspot for gang activity. Gangs like the Aryan Brotherhood, the Mexican Mafia, and the Black Guerrilla Family extended their control within the prison walls. These groups, with their powerful networks, influenced not only the prison but the criminal underworld outside as well. What made Pelican Bay so dangerous wasn't just the gangs, but the environment itself. The staff, often overwhelmed and undertrained, struggled to maintain order in such a volatile setting. Corruption ran deep within the institution, with officers sometimes turning a blind eye to inmate activities or even aiding in the distribution of contraband. The gang leaders who occupied the SHU were some of the most influential figures in California's criminal scene. These men, isolated from the outside world, created intricate communication systems using coded messages, smuggled letters, and even the prison phone system. They controlled not just their fellow inmates, but also their operations on the streets. The prison staff, however, were not immune to the growing power of these gangs. Some corrections officers were corrupted by the gangs, offering them protection or even directly participating in criminal activities. This created a toxic environment where prisoners and officers alike were trapped in a vicious cycle of violence and corruption. One of the most alarming aspects of Pelican Bay was its use of solitary confinement. Inmates were often kept in isolation for decades, sometimes for minor infractions. This extreme form of punishment didn't lead to rehabilitation, but rather to a descent into madness for many prisoners, who would later return to society even more dangerous than when they entered. The situation inside Pelican Bay became so severe that even inmates who had never been part of a gang were drawn into the violence. The isolation and despair created a sense of paranoia, where every inmate was either a target or a potential ally in the ever-volatile social structure of the prison. Pelican Bay's influence stretched far beyond its concrete walls. As inmates were released from the prison, they carried the violent lessons they had learned back to their neighborhoods. The connections and resources they built inside Pelican Bay gave them an edge in continuing their criminal enterprises on the outside. In the early 2000s, the prison's notoriety continued to grow. The increasing influence of gangs, coupled with the deteriorating mental health of many inmates, painted a grim picture of the prison's future. But Pelican Bay wasn't just a symbol of failure. It became a warning of what could happen when a system meant to control violence instead amplified it. During this time, a series of high-profile incidents took place inside Pelican Bay, highlighting the prison's dangerous nature. Fights between rival gangs broke out regularly, leading to injuries and, in some cases, deaths. But it wasn't just gang violence that made the prison so dangerous. The culture of brutality had seeped into every corner of the institution. Some prisoners, in their desperation, resorted to self-mutilation or attempted suicide as a way to escape their mental torment. The lack of adequate mental health care only exacerbated these issues, leaving many inmates trapped in a cycle of suffering with no hope of redemption. As the years passed, the stories of Pelican Bay's horrors began to spread, drawing attention from human rights groups, politicians, and the media. In 2011, A hunger strike led by inmates in the SHU highlighted the prison's inhumane conditions. The strike, which lasted for weeks, brought the issue of solitary confinement to the national stage. The hunger strike was a cry for help, a desperate attempt to bring attention to the widespread abuses taking place within the prison. It wasn't just about the conditions in the SHU, it was about the larger, systemic issues that allowed such conditions to exist in the first place. In response to the hunger strike, California lawmakers were forced to confront the issue of solitary confinement. However, any real change was slow, as the prison system remained entrenched in its ways. The entrenched power dynamics and corruption continued to shape life inside Pelican Bay, making meaningful reform difficult. Despite the growing awareness of the issues at Pelican Bay, the prison remained one of the most dangerous institutions in the United States. The sheer scale of the violence inside made it difficult for any meaningful oversight to take root. Officers and administrators often found themselves outmatched by the sheer number of inmates who were willing to do whatever it took to maintain power. Even as efforts were made to change the system, the prison's reputation as a breeding ground for violence and corruption only grew. Inmates continued to fight for control of the prison's underground economy, engaging in everything from drug trafficking to extortion, all while under the watchful eyes of the prison's overwhelmed staff. The power struggle within Pelican Bay was not limited to the inmates. Over time, even some corrections officers became part of the prison's illicit activities. This corruption, combined with the ever-present violence, created a volatile environment that seemed impossible to manage. As time went on, Pelican Bay became a symbol of everything wrong with the American prison system. Its isolation policies, its over-reliance on solitary confinement, and its failure to address the root causes of violence contributed to a system that only produced more violence. The level of violence in Pelican Bay reached a point where even the most hardened criminals began to fear what was happening within its walls. For many, life in the SHU meant not just the loss of freedom, but the loss of humanity itself. The mental toll of prolonged isolation had a lasting impact on everyone who was sent there. The prisoners who survived Pelican Bay's brutal conditions emerged from the SHU not as reformed individuals, but as individuals even more adept at surviving in a dangerous world. Many found it difficult to reintegrate into society, their lives shaped by years of isolation and abuse. Pelican Bay's transformation into a place more dangerous than the outside world was a slow, insidious process. What was intended as a place to isolate the worst offenders became a haven for gang activity, corruption, and violence. And despite the national outcry, the system persisted, unable to break the cycle. The inmates who had once been treated as the worst of the worst became the kings of Pelican Bay's underworld. They ran everything from the drug trade to smuggling operations, manipulating the prison system from the inside out. This created a dangerous power structure that even prison officials had difficulty dismantling. In many ways, Pelican Bay became its own microcosm of the criminal world. The power structures, the hierarchies, and the rivalries all mirrored what was happening outside the prison walls. The line between the incarcerated and the free world blurred as the prison became more and more like a city governed by its own laws. Outside the prison, Pelican Bay's story was often reduced to sensational headlines. But inside, it was a story of survival, power, and manipulation. Inmates had to constantly navigate a system where loyalty, violence, and fear were the driving forces. For many, the journey through Pelican Bay was not just about serving time, but about surviving a world that was often more dangerous than the one they had left behind. Inmates found themselves caught in a cycle of violence, where the only way to survive was to be as ruthless as the system that trapped them. Despite the overwhelming violence, Pelican Bay was also a place of strange alliances and unwritten codes. Prisoners who would have been enemies on the outside often formed temporary alliances for survival. These alliances were fragile, and betrayal was always lurking just around the corner. The prison's reputation for brutality only fueled its power. Inmates who entered Pelican Bay quickly learned that the rules of the outside world no longer applied. Survival in this environment meant adapting to a new set of rules, a set of rules that were written in blood. The danger of Pelican Bay wasn't just physical, it was psychological. The mental toll of constant fear, isolation, and violence took its toll on everyone involved, from the lowest-ranking inmates to the highest-ranking officers. In many ways, the prison became a place where the mind was just as much a weapon as the body. The ultimate tragedy of Pelican Bay was that, despite all of its violence and corruption, the prison was still seen as a necessary evil. It was a place where the most dangerous criminals could be locked away, but it was also a place that perpetuated the very problems it was designed to solve. In the end, Pelican Bay became a symbol of a broken system. A system that failed to reform, a system that thrived on violence and corruption, and a system that created criminals even more dangerous than the ones it was supposed to contain. Pelican Bay's legacy continues to shape the conversation about prison reform in the United States. Its story serves as a warning about the dangers of isolating inmates for extended periods of time and the profound effects that such isolation can have on an individual's psyche. As the prison system in the U.S. slowly begins to change, Pelican Bay remains a stark reminder of the need for reform. The prison story is one of failure, but it also offers lessons that can't be ignored. The question remains, how can a system that creates more monsters ever hope to fix the ones it's supposed to rehabilitate? The future of Pelican Bay is uncertain, but its story will undoubtedly continue to serve as a cautionary tale. The prison's dark history cannot be erased, but it can serve as a blueprint for what not to do in the future. If we are to create a more humane prison system, Pelican Bay shows us the dangers of forgetting humanity in the pursuit of punishment. As more attention is drawn to the failings of the prison system, Pelican Bay's story will remain at the forefront of the debate. Its legacy, though tainted, holds the key to understanding the systemic issues that need to be addressed in order to prevent future tragedies. For the men and women who were trapped in Pelican Bay, their stories are a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. They lived through horrors that many can scarcely imagine, and yet they survived. But their survival came at a cost that we can only begin to understand. As we look back on the history of Pelican Bay, we must ask ourselves what kind of future we want to build. One that continues to perpetuate violence and despair, or one that seeks to heal the wounds of the past and offer real solutions for those who have been broken by a system that was never meant to help them. Pelican Bay may have been a place of unspeakable danger, but it is also a place where we can learn valuable lessons. It is a place where the need for reform is undeniable, and where the failure to act may lead to even darker futures. The time for change is now.